Good morning. I'm going to call the Audit Committee meeting to order. This is our regular meeting of October 15th, 2018. With me at the dais here is Park Board Commissioner Chris Meyer, Mr. David Fisher, and myself. We do expect to be joined by Councilmember Warsami. Councilmember Schrader is sick, and we knew previously that Mr. Scott Nail wouldn't be able to make it this time. So we are not yet a quorum, so we cannot do official business, but I do want to call this meeting to order. Can we adopt the agenda, clerk? I'm going to move to adopt the agenda before you today. We have one main audit. It's our payroll audit report. It's been a long time in coming. And then we have a lot of updates from our auditor and from others in the past, some previously audited entities. So thank you, welcome, and we'll go ahead and get started. I will hold off on approving our meeting minutes from last time, and I will just ask Director Bigby, welcome, to go ahead.
Thank you, Chair Palmisano, Audit Committee members. We'll start with a payroll audit update. Our payroll audit was begun in 2017. We put it on hold for a little while due to staff turnover and picked it up again in mid-2018. As public servants, it is our responsibility to safeguard taxpayer dollars in the most effective and efficient manner while adhering to laws, regulations, and city policies governing payroll processes. So we reviewed internal controls over payroll processes. The processes that we determined to be in scope included policies and procedures, review of the master file, payroll timekeeping, payroll calculations, and payroll distribution. Also recording to the general ledger, and payroll and human resource system access and segregation of duties. As a result of our audit, we identified 5 issues, and we also introduced an issue risk rating matrix. So most audit issues will fall in the moderate range. Low risk issues do not require formal management follow-up. Management will address the low risk issues, but they don't have to fill out a validation memo, and audit doesn't have to spend time doing validation testing. Okay. The 5 issues are: the payroll register is not reconciled to the general ledger, and management's action plan is that they will implement a reconciliation process, which will be a manual process. Issue number 2 is the PeopleSoft user access roles and responsibilities and documentation is incomplete to ensure appropriate segregation of duties with payroll. So what this entails is getting a system-generated list of user roles and who has access to those roles. IT, HR, and finance management are working on getting an easy-to-interpret list of data so that they can ensure people who have access to various roles do not have conflicts of duties. An example would be someone working in HR who can set up a new employee in the system should not be able to also process payroll. Those are key duties that should be segregated. Because those duties, we were not able to confirm through system information that those duties are segregated, we did additional testing to make sure there were no inappropriate transactions, such as looking for ghost employees or inappropriate access, and we did not find any issues with that. The third issue is significant manual overrides and adjustments are not independently reviewed. Because that control is not in place, we reviewed manual adjustments and did not find any inappropriate adjustments, but it's a key control that should be implemented. So management's action plan is to review adjustments and make sure that significant adjustments are appropriately reviewed and documented. Issue number 4 is documentation missing from employee files. This is a result of the decentralized HR process where departments maintain some personnel records, including medical files. So it would be easy to envision that not all files are 100% complete. So in our sample selection, we did find a couple of HR files that were missing some documentation. HR is in the process of implementing a centralized and digitized process. This is the only audit issue that cannot be remediated within 1 year. They have pilot projects in place as we speak, and they're continuing to roll out, but it will take a little longer than a year for citywide for this control to be completely implemented. And the final low-risk issue is the payroll narrative was not completely updated. So management has agreed to update the payroll narrative, and once the update is made, they will do it annually thereafter. And I'd like to invite the Deputy Chief Financial Officer, Lori Johnson, to say a few words about payroll.
That'd be great. Welcome, Lori.
Good morning, Chair Palmisano, committee members. Pleasure to be here, and thank you to Internal Audit for their assistance. We had identified some changes that we wanted to make in payroll probably a year and a half ago, and have been in the process. Part of that is staffing changes, reorganization a little bit of our payroll department. And I'd like to introduce some staff who are here to assist in that. So we have a new payroll director, Katie Carroll. We previously did not have a payroll director, so this will help with some of that segregation of duty and different function in that. And then also Dawn Koenig, our deputy controller, who is relatively new. She's going to be assisting with some of the payroll reconciliation pieces. And then Lyle Hodges, our controller. And this is, payroll, as you know, is a joint effort between HR. We pay what they have in the system, and then the departments and the employees who input their data, and then also IT. So we have recognized some of the things that need improvement. Some of them are related to the system that we have, which is very challenging. We've recently embarked also on looking at a new Payroll Hr System that would deal with some of these issues that have been identified, particularly related to the security. We've also had IT involved in that because that's somewhat of an IT function, so we're continuing to unwind that to make that situation better. So we clearly appreciate, as I said, the input from Internal Audit. We will be working to rectify these issues and many other improvements that we see that could make payroll a better process, because it is a very important process for the city, and we want to make sure that the integrity of the system is maintained. So with that, I'll stand for any questions that you may have.
Thank you. I invite my colleagues with any questions they might have. I guess I'm curious, actually from Director Bigby's end. So given what Ms. Johnson just said, how does audit follow up on that, on appropriate systems, user access, and segregation of duties issue, or is it just kind of deemed complete now that we have these people in place?
Chair Palmisano, audit committee members, user access roles are visited in most of our audits. With this particular audit, upon the remediation date that we agreed upon, management will fill out a validation memo, which they say what they've done to remediate the issue. They provide supporting evidence, and then we go in and validate. For system user access, that would require us going in and testing and extracting user roles and information ourselves and ensuring that it really was remediated. At that point, when the issue is validated, we formally close the issue and no longer track it as an open issue. But user access roles are visited with every audit that we do if there's a system in scope for the audit.
Okay. Thank you. Others? Okay.
Thank you.
Yep.
We wanted to thank Finance for their cooperation. They were wonderful to work with.
Yeah. Director Bigby,
Yes.
can you just help explain the new issue risk rating table on
Sure.
page 8? It's pretty cool. It seems pretty useful. And as you get there, yep. Yeah, sorry, that was slide 7. I will announce we've been joined by Councilmember Warsame, so we're a full complement and we're authorized to conduct the city's business here.
Thank you, Chair Palmisano, Audit Committee members. Since we don't risk rate audit reports, we want to risk rate audit issues to give the Audit Committee and residents some perspective on what the risk really is around this area. Generally, we only audit high-risk areas because we have limited resources to provide audit services. The table will reflect issues that are high, moderate, or low. Low issues, while management will address them, don't require a formal management response and formal audit follow-up. However, audit tracks them so that over time, if we see it's a repeat issue or the low-risk issue is trending across multiple departments, then we will address it appropriately. Moderate issues require the standard remediation plan, generally within a year or less. High-risk issues require immediate management response. Generally, that could be 3 months that an issue has to be remediated, or longer if appropriate. So if we have high-risk issues, then the Audit Committee would pay special attention to those. Are there any other questions on the issue risk rating table?
No, that explains it for me. Mr. Fisher.
Thank you. Ms. Bigby, I've seen the definition for high risk, moderate risk, and low risk. But it seems a bit vague to me on how, for instance, a risk can be considered high versus moderate. Can you give us a better definition?
Sure. Very generally, we're saying that high risk is that key controls do not exist or are not properly implemented. So there's a complete control breakdown and there's significant risk to the control environment. So we use the language that the control environment is impaired. High risk improvement opportunities require immediate attention. Whereas a moderate risk, you have a control that's probably adequately designed or perhaps just needs some minor modifications to the way the control is carried out. Then you also look at how the control is implemented and if it's operating effectively. So a control might be designed properly, but management may override how the control is supposed to be performed. So in that case, it's not operating effectively. And that would be, in most cases, a moderate issue.
If I could follow up, Madam Chair. Moderate risk then is not an impairment of the function
Right.
that is to deliver on the mission
Right.
that is intended. But if it persists over a period of time, could it become a chronic failure that would elevate to a higher risk?
Yes.
All right.
If there's repeat issues, if it persists over time, if there's numerous moderate issues, then we would revisit whether there is an impairment to the control environment.
And one more question, Madam Chair. Is management involved in helping determine whether risk is high versus moderate or low?
That's a very good question. During our risk assessment process, we visit with management covering all the risk categories, whether it's reputation risk, operational risk, finance risk, and yes, management agrees to those risk ratings. In this case, for issue ratings, the issue is very high level, so when we vet the issues with management, we also propose the issue risk ranking, and then management has an opportunity to provide feedback. And if they disagree with the way that we rated a risk, an issue, then we would discuss that and come to a mutual agreement. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Nope. As we go, sorry, go ahead. Go ahead and continue. Here, so before we start audits in progress, or rather the auditor's update, I did want to go back just a minute. Now that we have a quorum of committee members, I'd like to move to accept the minutes from August 27th and also receive and file and direct staff to publish this payroll report. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? That carries. Thank you. Now we're ready for the auditor update.
Okay. We have 2 audits in progress. One is the AEG Management of Target Center audit, and the other is the Grant Management audit. The AEG Target Center audit is, the audit objective is to review controls in the city's management process of the AEG contract in general, and then compliance with contract terms. We are wrapping up field work this week. We have an exit conference with management today. There are a couple of issues that have bubbled up that we're vetting with management, so we don't provide a final write-up of the issues until we thoroughly discuss those issues with management. We expect to have issues drafted by the end of the week. Then after the issues are agreed upon and management comes up with their responses to remediating the issue, we draft the audit report. And we're expecting the audit report to be completed in the next 3 to 4 weeks.
Ms. Bigby,
Yes.
just because that's at the end of this week, is there anything else that remains to be tested, or what does wrapping up fieldwork mean
Yes,
a little
I
bit
have.
more specifically?
Within fieldwork, the items that remain to be tested are a few financial tests on service level agreements. And specifically, there's a financial reporting test, an event booking test, and an SLA around subcontractors. So wrapping up those tests this week. And then I also wanted to mention that AEG and city management have been very cooperative, so all the items that we have requested have been provided. It's just completing those financial tests. Grant management will be a pretty involved audit. We are looking at city grant management processes, which are pretty extensive. We have a lot of grants that the city touches, and also the Minneapolis Park and Recreation Board grants. So we have met with city finance management to discuss timing and scope, potential scope of the audit. We are to meet with Park Board Finance Management next week. After we have those meetings, we gather information, do a little study and research, and then revisit with management on scoping of the audit. Our primary focus is going to be on management of grant processes, but we'll also have some grants to test within various areas, and we want to be able to identify which areas pose the highest risk for the city. Are there any questions on the 2 audits in progress? Okay. I also wanted to mention, for grants specifically, if we get tips for fraud investigations or there are complaints, we track all of that and have all of that incorporated in our audit planning processes. So any of those items that have come through recently are in our purview and will be included in the scope of the audit. Okay, for our IT audits in progress, I'd like to introduce our IT auditor, Nikhil D'Souza, who is a partner with Backbone Consultants.
Thank you. Welcome, Mr. D'Souza.
Good morning, Chair Palmisano, committee members. I'm here to provide an update on 2 items. The first one is an audit of the Minneapolis Police Department's PIMS, which is the Police Information Management System, that went live on June 5th this year. And the other one is a consultation, which is with respect to the HR separation process. There we go. So overall, for the PIMS implementation, PIMS is replacing an older system known as CAPERS, which was the Computer Assisted Police Reporting System, which has been in use since the 1990s. Just given that it's an older system, the feasibility of integrating with newer technologies and making workflow a little more seamless and efficient, the entire police department decided to go out and look for commercial off-the-shelf software for law enforcement and records management, and that was in 2014. A decision was made to go with Versadex, and the system is supported by the vendor Versaterm. This was previously a consultation in 2017 when the implementation had begun. Actually, there was design discussions going on since 2016, so this project has been on for a few years. But we have finally reached, after go live on June 5th this year, we were able to actually start auditing a lot more items because the system is actually functional and live and no longer in a testing phase.
Mr. D'Souza, just so that we fully understand this, so are you saying that the system we use for PIMS now is called Versadex? And
That is the official term from the provider. Our internal name for it is PIMS.
got it.
So if you were to go to another city and you tell them Versaterm or Versadex, they will recognize it as the service provider. PIMS are internally known to the Minneapolis Police Department and to the local Minneapolis community as the record system. So the objectives overall for this audit that we're doing is to look at the logical access controls to protect both sensitive access as well as to make sure appropriate segregation of duties are enforced. In addition to that, make sure the operating system and database, given the sensitivity of the data, to see if there's any back-end access that's feasible, especially considering the vendor Versaterm has a very heavy involvement and is always plugged into the city network to actually do troubleshooting activities. This is something that's needed because we're in the early phases of this system going live. So that's something we need to monitor and look for towards the end to make sure that access is cut off so the vendor's not always in the city network. In addition to that, the last thing we'll be looking at is the data migration, because there were a lot of older systems that were being decommissioned, as well as integration with other key systems that need to be enabled. So that was the third key item we were looking for from an overall objective perspective. The status of the audit right now is about 80% complete. There's certain activities with respect to security configurations, new users being set up, and interfaces being enabled that are not going to be able to be tested till actually the system is fully updated. And as of the end of September, they still don't have a completion date on some of those. So there are certain items that are still moving in the legacy format and not in the new PIM system yet. And they're expected to be fully completed here in the next couple of months. So we're hoping to have this audit fully wrapped up and ready for the next audit committee meeting. Any
Thank you.
questions?
Mr. D'Souza, I guess I know just a little bit about this. And I think you're saying that we did an audit whilst a new PIM system was being put in place. Is that correct?
Absolutely. Yeah, Chair Palmisano, we started this as a consultation while the system was being put in place. So we were trying to get as many controls in the early design phases so that when it did go live, it already had controls built in instead for us finding it on later on. So we started as a consultation in 2017, and this year we moved it into an audit after the system went live on June 5th, 2018. So.
Thank you. I just wanted to explain that we don't normally audit systems quite so early, but this was an opportunity to make sure that we were doing something correctly.
Correct. And just to point out, there were a couple items that when we'll report on this audit, you'll note that will be marked as closed because we brought them up so early on that the city MPD as well as Versaterm were able to implement the changes before go live. So,
Thank you.
any other questions? All right, this second IT consult, I guess, to bring up that we're doing right now is there were just some background from 2014 to 2016, even into 2017. One of the key themes we were noticing across all our audits was the fact that the separation process would take a little longer and people continued to have access to key systems within the city and the city network for sometimes extended periods of time. So human resources worked with IT and used the ServiceNow tool to help create a new process and a workflow to streamline and try to reduce how long it takes to remove the access for users across the systems that they have access to. The main thing we were looking from an objective perspective is to review the timeliness aspect. This is meant to, and intended to be a quick consultation to ensure that what processes that they were designing and putting in place are actually operating as needed. So we'll probably be doing a fuller, a much deeper dive audit in the next couple of years after we go through a risk assessment process. So as of 10/6, the initial consultation was, we did an analysis already, but that data was from November 2017 to March 2018. Just to let you know, the reason why we started on November 2017 is because the new process went into effect last October. So it was starting in the initial first weeks of November that the actual new process was being utilized. Between the data we got from November 2017 to March 2018, it appeared on average it was taking 2 weeks to remove user access from within the city systems and network. We wanted, and this is significantly smaller timeline than a turnaround than we had previously noted. But now we've decided to extend the consultation for a few more months to continue to see if that trend is actually holding on or if it has actually slipped down. And so we have obtained the data from the period of March 2018 to September of this year, and we're doing the same analysis to see whether the 2-week turnaround still holds true or not. And we're expecting to get that done by the next committee meeting as well.
Mr. D'Souza, just because we look at this kind of information, both attracting people as employees to the city and our attrition rate in terms of employees leaving the city, can you share how big is your data set for that kind of a period?
We're talking well into the hundreds of users being terminated. So I have to go back and get you a specific number, but it's minimum 250 to 300, the turnaround.
And in terms of terminations, would that data set include then people who, for example, are paid summer interns, people that are working temporarily in the elections office, that type of thing?
That was one of the items that we actually have to take out because they're only granted temporary access. And so we filter out for those certain users because their ability is only to submit time and not to necessarily pull or view any city information. So from a risk-based process and based on prior audits that we have performed, we have decided to eliminate that particular subset.
And so what you're saying then, Mr. D'Souza, is that even eliminating that subset, there's about 300 data points to work with?
No, those are part of that 300.
I see. Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Any questions from my colleagues? Mr. Fisher.
If I may, thank you, Madam Chair. You found an average of 2 weeks from the removal request creation until access is removed. How large is the risk in your estimation of having a 2-week period there where access continues even after termination?
Yeah, Committee Member Fisher, Chair Palmisano. The main aspect over here is the type of access being disabled. What we are hoping to do is once this process matures is start having a discussion as to, based on the type of resource being terminated, the timeliness aspect may need to be different. So for human resource managers, payroll managers, directors, anybody who has the ability to probably approve anything over 50,000 or certain things, we would recommend that those be turned around in a 3-day timeline, if not the same day. If it's a 2-week timeline, if it's folks that are more in the field or working on different aspects, the risk to the data is low because they're primarily going in there to just obtain their payroll data as well as to submit time. So the risk is limited. So right now we've grouped them all together. So we don't necessarily have the view of the high risk ones being termed timely and the lower risk ones taking longer, but that's the next evolution in our discussion after this process matures.
And I would just say, if to point back to that old audit, I forget specifically which meeting it was, but there were pretty specific findings in terms of what the risk was for different groups of people, and it is spelled out in that report. So thank you for following up on this. Any other questions or comments? Okay.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. D'Souza. Chair Palmisano, Audit Committee members, will now look at the audit consultations and special requests in progress. We introduced a new slide that will help you have a count of where we're at with certain types of projects and where we were at as compared to last committee meeting. So we have currently 1 audit closed, the payroll audit, 4 open audits. So those are the 2, the AEG grant management and the 2 IT projects. Consultations, we closed 1 and we have 7 open. Special projects, that's a new category I'm calling. We have a digital signature that we're coordinating with 311 and IT, and we thought there would be other departments that would want to use the city agreed upon digital signature process as we become have a more digitized environment. So that special project will be going on for a little while. The project is just being opened with IT.
Director Bigby, can you just tell us a little bit what a digital signature is? Like, what is its value?
Sure. I don't have too much information right now, but there's electronic and digital signatures often offer better security than handwritten signatures. If you don't have a digital signature capability, then you're in a digital environment. You have to print out and get manual copies of documents, sign them, scan them back in. That's very resource intensive. But we want digital signature processes to be uniform across the city. So we're asking IT to come up and tell us what is the best process to use, and then citywide we'll use that process. And there could be some variations depending on requirements. For example, 311 and the city attorney's office might have different requirements. So IT will help us determine what is most appropriate for each of the departments.
Thank you. So this isn't just for working around city departments, but also in ways we work with the public?
Ultimately, I think so. I think if we can have this uniform process, best practices for all of our activities. So the project was just opened this week, and as it progresses, then next audit committee, I can plan on providing you an update and more details.
Thank you.
Continuous monitoring is another new category. I wanted to briefly mention what that is all about. We have one consultation that we're basically done with the work that we're doing for the moment as agreed with management, and that's the CPED record retention. So we met with them, we provided some feedback, provided them a framework, and as we're in meetings with them pretty regularly, they're making good progress. So they really at this time don't need another deliverable from audit, but we're not quite ready to pull back. So they agreed that we could continue participating in their meetings and discussions. Continuous monitoring puts responsibility on us to escalate any issues or potential risks and discuss them right away with management if we do see any. At the point that the project is fully implemented or risks are sufficiently reduced, then we would discontinue our continuous monitoring. The other continuous monitoring we just became involved in is with the citywide data governance. We were invited to the Information Governance Committee meetings, so we'll participate in those ongoing, and it gives us the opportunity to raise risks or discuss with management if we see any problems that aren't being addressed. And then investigations, often when investigations are in progress, you can't discuss them or have conversations about them. Sometimes there's not much that audit even needs to do, but we wanted to give you some idea of where our resources are being allocated. So I think what we'll do is just tell you how many are in progress and how many have been closed since the last meeting. And then any proprietary information or confidential information we would discuss with you confidentially as agreed upon with the city attorney.
Thank you. I think this slide is helpful.
Okay, thank you. This is just high level of consultations and special requests in progress. The blue indicates the planning phase, purple is where we're doing the bulk of the work, and reporting is green, either continuous monitoring or some type of memo or formal report, depending on what type of project it is. The Park Police body-worn camera compliance readiness, as a reminder, this review is to review their updated policies and procedures to make sure they're in compliance with state statutes. So we've met with them, we've issued a scope memo. They're in the process of updating their policies and procedures, and we expect to get a copy of them sometime in October. Then we'll perform this readiness review, readiness assessment, and give them a copy of our results. And then they will, once they meet their 2-year mark, which is coming up pretty soon, they will file their reports as required by the state. CPED records management, I just went over. We're now in continuous monitoring with them. The equity in the Minneapolis police recruiting processes is a fun project to work on because we see a lot of value add. We've had integrated team discussions with HR, IT, police, police conduct oversight, Patrick Ryan, Deputy Chief Art Knight. What we're doing right now is identifying the data that we need to obtain, make formal data requests. We expect to get the data probably in November. Once we get the data, internal audit is going to perform the initial data analysis using our ACL tool. We'll then provide the results back to the police department, who will determine which of their processes and procedures they might enhance or change based on the results of the data. I think anecdotally we have an idea where the problem areas are, but often the data might tell us a different story or highlight risks that we hadn't identified previously. Are there any questions?
Well, first I'll interject just to say I do really appreciate your approach in this and the different people around the city that you've been meeting with. Both Joy Marsh-Stevens and her team have been involved, as well as we've been reaching out even beyond the police department in terms of what are some of the perceptions of barriers that exist in recruitment and hiring. So any questions or thoughts from my colleagues?
Okay, thank you. The Neighborhood Community Relations has been an ongoing consultation project with internal audit. I recently, Neighborhood Community Relations recently contacted me, and we're going to be providing feedback on some new audits that they're doing in a couple of their neighborhoods. So that project is in progress. We have started discussions. And what that might look like is some of the neighborhoods receive financial audits or agreed upon procedures. And if, excuse me, if anything unusual comes back, we look at that or determine if anything needs to be changed. Audit is also looking at overall processes for how we manage monies that we provide to neighborhoods, ensuring that there is appropriate controls in place to prevent fraud and to ensure that the monies are being spent appropriately. So probably by March, we'll issue a report and suggest some improvements to the overall control environment, in addition to the specific feedback that we're asked for certain neighborhood reports.
Go ahead, Mr. Fisher.
Thank you, Madam Chair. With respect to the Neighborhood Community Relations Project, do you actually talk with the neighbors that are utilizing the funds and applying them?
Chair Palmisano, Committee Member Fisher, I have not yet. I am just now getting involved, and I think that that would be a very good value add, is to make sure all stakeholders are meeting with us. So, okay. Results Minneapolis is also an ongoing consultation. The city coordinator's office has come up with Results Minneapolis to help departments identify the best metrics that they may be able to use to measure their value add, their products, or not, I'm sorry, not products, but their services or other activities that they perform. As a department is turning in their metrics for the first time, Results Minneapolis then meets with internal audit. We provide feedback on those metrics, suggest improvements, and then they give that feedback back to the department. And then the department will do a periodic and ongoing metrics reporting. So we have one that was put in our bucket for NCR, actually, Neighborhood Community Relations, and we'll be reviewing those metrics this week for the first time.
I do want to point out something on the results piece. Is I'm really proud of how our audit department, it was about 2 years ago now, really started digging into results and started to see. It was actually our prior audit director that brought up the power and the potential of using results better and more consistently in our city. I do just want to share here that a lot of that results work has gotten to the point where I've been working with finance, and we are getting comfortable with the idea of being able to do more performance management, performance oversight, I guess I should say, as a city council, but program evaluation as a city. In order to do that, we're going to need to somehow make some space for that, and that is why for people that follow our Charter Commission in that process, we have been in conversations with the Charter Commission, members of the Board of Estimate and Taxation, on moving to a biennial budget cycle, a 2-year budget cycle. So I just wanted to point out that a lot of this work started because of the good analytical efforts of our audit committee. So thanks.
Thank you, Chair Palmisano. We're always trying to improve our data capture and use of data for reporting and enhancing management decision making. So I expect over the next year for that process to continue to grow and develop. Enterprise complaint management processes is ongoing. We're continuing to meet integrated citywide teams. We're not including all management levels yet or all department heads. Mainly the focus is city attorney, internal audit, HR, and IT. We're in discussions now of, we've discussed what our current processes are and where we think failures are in those processes. We're now doing some benchmarking with other cities and other local governments for best practices. We're going to then reconvene in January and learn from those best practices, try to come up with the process that we think is going to work best for the city. We have an idea now, but we want to see if there's something going on in other cities that might be more innovative than what we've thought of. Then we'll have approximately through June to finalize where we think that this process should go. And then in June, we'll start the RFP process head by the city attorney's office to make sure that we have a tool that can handle enterprise complaint management. And that's pretty complex if you think about calls coming in through the ethics hotline and the police department and 311. And then a bulk of the complaints actually come up through management and HR. So how do you track and record all of that and ensure that they're consistently managed and managed appropriately? So we think that this is going to also add a lot of value. It just takes time to work through everything and make sure that you have the tools that can work for you. And it will also help with reporting. So the city attorney and internal audit have reporting responsibilities for fraud and ethics violations. And now we'll have a better idea of what types of complaints we're getting, whether low-risk complaints are happening at increased frequencies. We would be able to identify trends that wouldn't otherwise be visible. Are there any questions on that process?
I'm not seeing any.
All right, and we are on our prior audit issue follow-up section. Quick highlight, total open issues. We have about 57. Overdue audit issues, we have 18. Audit issues closed since last audit committee. I'm very excited to say that we have 8. We went many, many years without closing any audit issues, so we have 8 formally closed. 6 we expect to be closed soon. They're in the process of validation. And then open audit issues that are due this quarter by December 31st are 9. So we expect to have 9 more closed early next year. And we're still focusing our efforts on the oldest audit issues. So there are still, as you can see, a number of overdue audit issues. Once we get those cleaned up, we hope that we don't have too many overdue audit issues to report next year.
I think it's a good idea to highlight these every audit committee meeting, so I appreciate your attention to them. I'd like to ask why the overdue audit issues have increased since the last report, and specifically which audit issues are overdue.
Okay. Chair Palmisano, audit committee members, we see an increase in overdue audit issues despite the fact that we're closing and validating issues, because last audit committee meeting was August 27th, and we had a number of issues that were due at the end of the quarter, September 30th. And so we're just now 2 weeks after that deadline. So not all management have completed their issue validation memos for those September 30th deadlines, and they're being counted as overdue. We do expect those to be closed by next audit committee meeting. And part of our regular follow-up, management is required to follow up with us periodically with new audit issues to ensure that if a deadline is going to be missed, that we know about it in advance, and if the audit would have the opportunity to weigh in if there's anything we can do to help with the remediation or have more risk discussions.
Thank you. We have a question or comment from Mr. Fisher.
Thank you, Madam Chair. With respect to the 18 overdue audit issues, are any of these in the high-risk category?
Chair Palmisano, Committee Member Fisher. It's hard for me to assess the risk of issues from prior audits that far back. I would estimate moderate. We don't think that there are any high-risk issues that are still open or overdue, but I can tell you what areas they are in. The overdue issues are as a result of the HR file maintenance and retention, the IT program and project management consultation, which I wanted to qualify that. I've been in discussion with IT and they are in the process of remediating those, but that initial write-up didn't actually require formal management follow-up, but they did follow up proactively and started being tracked as issues. So those 4 are really didn't require formal follow-up. But we will have a complete remediation response and risk reduction. It did highlight some important risks in the protection of personal data and IT processes. The CPED loan lifecycle management has 1. PeopleSoft Finance Access Review has 1. Procure to Pay has 1. MPD third party has 1. Workers' Comp have 1. Park and Recreation Worker Safety Audit has 3. But they had 10 initially, and they have closed out 7, so they're working hard on those, and we expect those 3 to be remediated soon. And then the MPD Property and Evidence Room are also working hard. They have 4 right now, but they've been in touch with our office to get those closed.
Ms. Bigby, it might be helpful if we had, for this type of chart, these statistics here, another type of heat chart or a heat map to show us the degree of risk that may be involved with each of these.
I agree. Chair Palmisano, Committee Member Fisher, I think we will do that for you. The problem with the prior issues before we introduced risk rating scales is that was not agreed upon with management. So what we would do with prior issues is propose a rating and then get management to agree to the rating, and then we can have a heat map of all the open and overdue issues. I think that's a great idea, and we'll have that ready for next audit committee meeting. Okay. Any other questions? Okay, we have 2 guest speakers today. I'm very excited to introduce Casey Carl, our city clerk, who's going to speak to records management and data governance. And following Casey, we have Sandy Christensen from Minneapolis. Casey?
Thank you. Mr. Carl, welcome. Thank you for keeping this issue in front of us.
Absolutely. Good morning, Madam Chair and committee members. As noted, my name is Casey Carl, and I have the privilege of serving as the city clerk for Minneapolis. I'm here today to give an update in response to the 2015 Records Management Data Governance Audit. To level set with the committee, this was the first audit that was completed under the newly reconstituted audit committee and the internal audit department in the prior council term. My office was pleased to be able to partner with the audit team to complete this enterprise assessment because it gave us a third-party evaluation of the city's successes and its failures in terms of the management of information assets. And it has also provided us then a general roadmap for how to make improvements over the course of the past few years. It's my hope that some of these highlights will help inform you of the status of our work in this regard. So to begin, to remind the committee, this audit was completed and presented in October of 2015. Overall, the findings of that audit concluded that the city lacked an effective framework to manage its information assets. In the absence of that framework, the city is then put in a position where it may not be able to accurately and effectively ensure the security of private information, to validate compliance with applicable laws and regulations, or to respond to requests for documentation. And of course, all of that can expose the city to legal and regulatory risk. The audit evaluated the city's performance against a set of objective standards promulgated by ARMA International, which is a leading worldwide association of information management professionals. These standards, referred to as the generally accepted record-keeping principles, are similar to standards for different industries. For example, generally accepted accounting principles for accounting professionals. This slide shows the 8 GARP standards: accountability, transparency, integrity, protection, compliance, accessibility, retention, and disposition. Performance is measured on each standard using a 1 to 5 scale, where 1 indicates substandard performance and 5 indicates what ARMA refers to as a transformative system. Agencies applying the GARP model should, at a minimum, achieve a rating of 3 for each of those standards, which denotes that all essential elements of a record-keeping system comply with legal and other regulatory requirements. A full listing of those objectives was on the slide, and as it shows, Minneapolis did not score well in any of the 8 principles. In fact, the city's total score was 1.65 on the overall 5-point scale. And remember, an average score of 3 is considered minimally essential for an organization to be considered in compliance with all legal, regulatory, and business requirements. That low score means that the city's existing enterprise information management framework fails to meet the minimum standards for legal, regulatory, and operational requirements and responsibilities. And the city's lowest scores were on criteria tied to systems that demonstrate integrity, protection, and compliance. In March 2016, then, the Office of City Clerk presented its management response to this audit, and that response structured its recommendations into a set of 3 interrelated spheres or buckets shown on this slide. First, there were recommended plans that involved data governance. Second, recommended plans related to enterprise operations. And third, recommended plans about improved centralized support. Within each of these buckets, a set of 3 specific actions were identified as top priorities to pursue based on the findings of that audit. And completing these recommended action plans, we believe, would give the city an effective framework to ensure that its information assets are produced and managed in ways that enable the city to operate effectively, to comply with all legal and regulatory requirements, and to serve the interests of the public. This slide then shows the current status of those recommended action plans. And as you can see, progress has been made and continues to be made in about half of the identified areas from the 2016 management response. However, given resource constraints and other enterprise priorities, we've not yet made progress in several areas as shown on this slide. The most important recommendation for us came from the 2016 management response around a proposed information governance ordinance. Perhaps the most critical finding from the audit was the lack of an adequate governance structure to ensure accountability. The clerk's office views this finding as foundational. All the remaining conditions that were detailed in that audit were the result of not having an effective accountability framework in place. Several of our peer jurisdictions have ordinances in place that express, as a matter of permanent policy, the value of information as a strategic asset and resource. By contrast, Minneapolis did not mention information governance, data management, or any policy statement on government data in its charter or its code. In speaking with our peer jurisdictions, most agreed that having that clear statement of policy embedded in their charters or their codes was a critical factor for their ultimate program success. So as a consequence, the top priority in our response was the adoption of an information governance ordinance that would provide clear, enduring authority for an enterprise information management program. Happily, this ordinance was brought forward by Councilmember Palmisano in March of 2017. That ordinance does provide the outline of an enterprise information governance policy and a related program, and it establishes clear accountability from the City Council through all departments down to frontline delivery of service. To achieve this level of alignment, the ordinance provides for an Information Governance Policy Committee to oversee and administer this program. This committee includes the city clerk, city attorney, city coordinator, and chief information officer. And as Ms. Bigby noted, we have several work groups, and she's been invited to participate as well. The Information Governance Policy Committee is responsible for oversight and implementation of enterprise policies and initiatives related to government data, data accessibility and security, and for undertaking regular reviews to approve changes in existing policies or to recommend the adoption of new policies. In addition to this general level of oversight, this committee also conducts periodic evaluations where appropriate, and will engage the internal auditor in a more comprehensive way related to audit of that program to verify compliance in the future. Additionally, as shown on this slide, the policy committee has created a number of multi-departmental work groups tackle some prioritized work on enterprise policies. So for example, there's now a work group that evaluates existing enterprise policies to harmonize those and to eliminate any redundancies or conflicts where they exist. We also have work groups that are evaluating and generating recommendations in the areas of information risk management, data incident response, and also data use and analytics. Coming into the current year, the Information Governance Policy Committee has recommended, and Council has concurred, that another improvement would be to integrate all of the various data reports that are regularly presented into a single State of Data report that would be presented each year. And that first report is set to be presented to the Council's Enterprise Committee, chaired by Councilmember Palmisano, next month. Staff hope to not only present important metrics about the current use of data, but also to show that data, as a strategic resource, can be leveraged to support the transition to a data-driven decision-making body, both within the enterprise, but also in partnership with community stakeholders. So we're excited to be able to bring that first report detailing the state of data in the city of Minneapolis next month. And that concludes my prepared remarks on where we are in response to the 2015 audit. I'm happy, of course, to stand for questions the committee might have.
Yeah, I do hope there are some. Any questions or comments from my colleagues? Commissioner Meyer.
I was just wondering why we chose the ordinance route instead of the charter route. Is there any advantage to having a charter amendment proposed?
Madam Chair, Committee Member Meyer, the most efficient form for us is through the code because it can be changed easier than can a charter. Charter, of course, requires either a vote of the public or a unanimous decision by the entire council and the approval of the mayor. So because the industry that involves data management and data compliance, data analytics, so much of those tools can change quickly and rapidly over time. Having it in our code, which is only second in priority to the charter, allows us to codify that at a very high level, but still maintain flexibility and efficiency in terms of making changes going forward to reflect the industry as it evolves.
Other thoughts, questions? Mr. Fisher.
Madam Chair, well, thank you for the report. I am impressed by the slide that you had, the status of recommended actions. There are, we have the information governance ordinance done and others in progress, but there are various of these that you cite as being having no progress. And I'm wondering if you could give us a better assessment of the concern around the no progress evaluation.
Madam Chair, Committee Member Fisher, the issues that show no compliance or no progress at this point, particularly around number 3, the monitoring and compliance, is because those have to happen in a sequence. Those areas that are shown colored here in blue are really sequential. So first and foremost, we had to have the ordinance in place and the policy oversight, that framework put in place, and that Information Governance Policy Committee established a meeting. So that committee has met twice now. We've formed those work groups that I mentioned, so that work is beginning. Before we can get to monitoring and compliance, that work has to advance, and we just haven't had the time to get there. That's where it's going to be really important for the IGPC, or the Information Governance Policy Committee, to connect back with our audit team, because part of that evaluation and compliance is to have them come back in and say, here were weaknesses, and conduct a similar evaluation to show that we have made progress against some objective criteria. So that third one is really a matter of just timing and not being further down the road with our program at this point. Some of the other ones are in a similar position. Number 5, program policies, procedures, and resources. Those are issues that are being examined by those work groups that I mentioned. And so since those have just been formed, they've started working in evaluating the city's numerous existing policies. There are oftentimes conflicts or some challenges within those policies as they've not been harmonized over time. And so getting an entire list of those and evaluating those has been more time consuming than I think probably first anticipated. Where there's not been a lot of progress from my perspective are on those 3 buckets shown in gray. These relate primarily to the clerk's office and its resource as a centralized service for the enterprise. And here really it's just a matter of too few of resources to serve too many needs, and prioritizing those means starting back at number 1 and coming down.
Thank you, Mr. Carl. You know, a challenge of this has been indeed that nobody's really in charge of it. So that's part of the purpose of the ordinance, is to create a unit of people that can together help us govern and get us to a better place. But, you know, accountability is really key for any sort of progress to occur. So whilst I appreciate that the upcoming move to a new building has given some individual department heads urgency to deal with old boxes of cold storage and paper files and stuff, I found these findings back when we did this audit to be absolutely alarming. So you'll see it's complicated. If you come to visit me in my office, you'll see an example of what we think we will show as perhaps a illustrative example of data transparency, and the example is of the police department, and it shows you all of the different layers of systems that go into trying to provide something available on, in this case, a dashboard that is always current instead of lopping out a point-in-time, you know, Excel spreadsheet on something. It is important to build these systems, and you'll see that it is very complex and complicated. I'm curious, Mr. Carl, could you give us an example of a city that you think might be doing it well, or that the GARF standards rate quite a bit higher than others? And maybe are there any kind of key tenets of best practices that we can take from that, or that you think of as you go about this work? And I just need to point out that you have been the most committed person in the city to this effort, and I appreciate that a lot.
Thank you, Madam Chair. When we responded to the audit in 2015, Assistant Clerk Kristen Rummelhoff and then City Records Manager Josh Schaefer, who has since moved to the Health Department, and I were looking around the nation at what local governments, counties even, cities, that might be benchmarks for us. And two that popped up pretty high in terms of not only their program, but in terms of their ranking against objective scores were the city of Austin, Texas, and the city of Seattle, Washington. But what's interesting here is that in some cities, the functions that my office coordinates in an umbrella-like manner are divided out into different ways. So the city of Austin has what I would call the preeminent or the best model for records management in the United States at a city level. The city clerk there is often called nationally, internationally for groups to talk about the program she does. And she has what she calls a 10-step program where she provides deliverables to all the departments in Austin in terms of helping them get from a state of I am not in compliance and don't know what I have, and I don't know what I don't know about what I have, to here are the deliverables in 10 steps that get me to a compliant program. So not only do I know what I have, I'm only retaining what I need to retain for the length of time required by law or my business needs. I'm disposing of things I don't need, and my data that I have is public if it's public and private if it's private. So that is a very complex program that she's put in place there. We actually visited Austin. Christian Rummelhoff and Mr. Schaefer had visited and gotten a lot of information from the city clerk there about her program and its success. Seattle has a solid program for records management. Where they are excellent is in terms of turning city resources in terms of data into strategic tools that are used for decision making, which is based out of what the clerk does in terms of records management, but then provides that as a platform for government decision making so that other people, other departments, even the community, can take advantage of those assets and use that data in ways that can inform decisions, that can show transformation from point A to point B, and can also demonstrate the city's progress along its commitments and goals to the community. So Seattle has a really good program. What I would call beyond just records management or data governance, but use of data for transformative purposes.
Thank you. That's helpful. Any other questions or comments from my colleagues? Nope.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Carl. We now have Sandy Christensen to talk about Meet Minneapolis. Sandy?
Hi there. Welcome, Ms. Christensen.
Yep, Chair Palmisano, members of the committee. I'm Sandy Christensen, Vice President of Finance and Administration for Meet Minneapolis. And on behalf of Meet Minneapolis, we thank you for the opportunity to return to this committee and give you an update on the audit findings that were presented to you in June. So thank you for this opportunity. To refresh your memory, there were 4 items that were brought to you as issues resulting from the audit. There was one issue regarding performance indicators, one regarding our conflict of interest policy, contract required reporting, as well as contract oversight. As regards to performance indicator results, we have been able to make progress on 3 of the 7 items that were components of that particular finding. And for your convenience, the first item was the reporting of our economic impact, also the definition of private revenue, third-party validation of the future room night key performance indicator, the apparent discrepancy in the attendance at the Minneapolis Convention Center in reporting between what the Convention Center was reporting and what Meet Minneapolis was reporting. And then also the definition of engaged digital users, our visitor information, and finally the return on investment figure. The items that we've been able to make progress upon include the economic impact calculator. We have made significant improvement in terms of our internal training to ensure consistency in how our employees are inputting data, analyzing the data, as well as reviewing it periodically to ensure that there are no outliers and that we are not duplicating information as had been found in the audit findings. One area in that particular finding that we still need to continue working is to find a third-party validation of the economic impact calculator. We are currently working within the industry. The provider Destinations International, that is the organization that provides that calculator. And we will be working with our peers throughout the country to determine a mechanism in which we can be assured that the number provided through that calculator is indeed accurate and able to be used for other purposes. As regards to the definition of the engaged digital user, we have engaged in an exercise to complete a glossary of how we intend to measure that, and we will be providing that glossary with every quarterly report that we submit to the city coordinator as well as to the executive director of the convention center. Similarly, with the visitor information measure, we have also updated our definition of what constitutes a visitor information request, and we'll also be including that regularly with our report so that it's very clear as to what data is being incorporated. As regards to the return on investment KPI, performance indicator, we will be continuing to work on that because it is a calculation that involves utilization of the economic impact calculator. So we believe that once we're able to affirm the validity of all components of the economic impact calculator, that we'll be able to resolve the return on investment item. And it's very important, we believe, to point out that for all of the measures that we engage in with the convention center and with the city of Minneapolis, we think it's important that they're measurable, and I think what we have found is that some of the items that we have agreed upon as a reporting item are not necessarily measurable. So we'll be looking forward to engaging with the city when we renegotiate our contract at the end of 2019 to ensure that what we want to give to you is something that we can provide to you. Excuse me. As regards to the conflict of interest policy, excuse me, we had inconsistency between the Meet Minneapolis employee handbook as well as the conflict of interest policy. One policy had $100, another had $50. We have now updated that policy to ensure that both are stated as $50. As regards to finding number 3, that related to the lack of narrative and additional discussion items that were included with our quarterly report. We've been working with the convention center as well as the city coordinator to identify and create a new template that would be much more clear in terms of the information that they require versus what we provide to them. And indeed, with the second quarterly report, have included a rather extensive narrative and discussion piece that should help in understanding the particular items that are being presented. Finally, the fourth finding is regarding the affirmation of the KPIs, the 4 KPIs, the room nights, the leisure room nights, private revenue, and convention center revenue, providing for a third-party audit of those numbers to ensure that the information received by the city has indeed been vetted and approved by a third party. Coincidentally, at the time of the completion of the audit, we had been engaged with a third party audit through Clifton Larson Allen, so it was very affirmative to us to have the internal auditor note that that was an important component to our relationship, and we're pleased to say that we had already been engaged in that particular area. And with that, we continue to work on the 4 items in finding number 1 related to the measures that are in our current contract. We're looking forward to having them updated and more accurate for our new contract, again, beginning after 2019. I'm happy to answer any questions as I'm able.
Thank you. This was a big audit report a few months back, and I'm just curious if my colleagues have any additional thoughts or findings. I really appreciate your being here today and
Thank you.
your willingness to stand before us and give us a pretty thorough update. Mr. Fisher?
Thank you. Thank you for this report. I've worked with Meet Minneapolis in the past and appreciate the work that you've done to look at this audit and the results. I'm wondering if you're going to take the performance indicators and try to reevaluate some of the prior year reports that you have submitted as well to see if there's some reconciliation there that should be made.
Chair Palmisano, Committee Member Fisher, we are going through an exercise. The audit itself covered the 3 years of the contract that had already happened, I guess. And we will be going through, as we look at new measures going forward, any difficulties that we had in determining data that was reported. I don't think that we'll go through the exercise of re-reporting everything. However, our work with the internal auditor was very important in helping us to identify any variances that we should be continuing to look forward into the future. So the opportunity to engage in this internal audit has actually been very helpful for us in terms of looking at areas that we do need to look at more closely. So we're looking forward to that opportunity in the future.
Thank you. Any other questions? Thank you, Ms. Christensen.
Appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you, Ms. Christensen. Then these are slides with our audit issue detail. We've already gone over a summary of our audit issues. It includes 2 slides on state auditor findings, and there are no changes in the status since the last audit committee. The open issues are all in progress. A quick note on our internal audit department projects. The citywide risk assessment refresh is in progress. We've met with 311 and 911, and we have conversations with IT and other departments scheduled in the near future. We hope to have a majority of our key departments, our larger departments, finished by December, and we will have some proposed audits to add to the audit plan. We will have continuing conversations throughout the year so that risk assessment won't be a one-time conversation in November. We're going to have these conversations with management throughout the year so that we can continually add to our audit plan and have approximately 12 to 18 months of audits on the plan at any given time. We have audit committee risk assessment training following this meeting, and that's a discussion on the risk assessment process and then specifically our approach to the risk assessment refresh. We have policies and procedures in progress. Instead of trying to have a concerted effort of updating them over a period of a week or 2, we encounter updates that are needed as we perform those procedures or activities. So we still intend on getting the formal policies and procedures completed by December 31st, and we'll discuss with the audit committee and city attorney if we want to maybe link those online. I noticed other cities have their procedures linked online, but we would first have to review them with the city clerk and the city attorney also. So we'll allow enough time for that to happen. And then we would update them as needed or at least annually going forward.
Thank you. I appreciate that in our conversation, Director Bigby, that we decided that for the conversation about risk assessment and our approach to it, and really being able to have some real dialogue about that between audit committee members and yourself. We're going to next adjourn this meeting to room 315. It is still an open meeting, but it is just to conduct a study session on what a risk assessment is and what it means. And everybody's welcome to go in there. Are there any additional thoughts or items from the report of the internal auditor today? So with that, I'd like to make a motion to receive and file that update report, and I appreciate the in-depth reporting of all of the work in progress. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? That carries. And with that, we'll adjourn to room 315 for the study session on risk assessment. Thank you for joining us. Bye-bye.
Thank you.